Okay, hi everyone. This is Cassie again, and we're kind of talking to two different groups of people today. We have both Big 12 Voting Challenge members as well as the Texas Voting Network members. So if you're with the Texas Voting Network and wondering why Oklahoma is hanging out with us today, that is why. So I'm going to, for now, Lauren, I'm going to put you on mute just so hopefully it will stay on my screen while I'm sharing it. And then we'll move forward. I feel like it's not sharing my screen. Okay. So today we're going to talk about how to be prepared for the election, which is coming up immediately on Tuesday, and then things to think about after the election. So we'll be talking about election laws and protection, ways to celebrate on election day, election night watch parties, election debriefings, and then just moving past the midterm. Those two kind of go hand in hand. So some laws that we need to think about, especially where students are concerned, start with electioneering. So individuals cannot be electioneering in different states and different distances. So in Texas, it's 100 feet. Oklahoma, it's 300, as well as Iowa, and then 250 in Kansas. And what electioneering means is that you can't be out supporting a campaign, a candidate, a proposition, anything specifically on the ballot within that distance. Technically, if you're just encouraging people to vote, that's not electioneering, but a lot of polling locations will still be really concerned with what you're doing, and if they ask you to move, a lot of the time it's easier to keep them happy rather than get in trouble and deal with like legal ramifications for your school. So for Oklahoma and Iowa, there are no explicit rules about if you can wear partisan clothing to the polls, except that I know in Iowa they said you can't linger in the polls if you have partisan clothing. And then in Texas and Kansas, there are straight up rules. You cannot have like a t-shirt, a button, anything supporting a candidate, a campaign, a proposition. Additionally, really important to think about are cell phones in polling locations. So in Texas and Iowa, your cell phones must be turned off when you go into the poll. And so at first you think that may not sound like a big deal, but the reality is a lot of people actually keep who they want to vote for like on their phone digitally. And so if you are tabling out near a polling location, one of the more useful things you can do is make sure you have scrap paper so people who were intending to use their phones when they vote can have something written down. In Oklahoma and in Kansas, it's that you cannot, or Kansas, you just cannot take a picture in the polling location. And then in Oklahoma, you can take a picture, but you can't disclose who you voted for, and they recommend you don't take pictures, but it's not a specific law. I have the lovely picture of Justin Timberlake because he got in trouble for doing just what we're talking about, taking a picture at the polls during the 2016 election. There are other laws that are just so specific to states and to county that I think it is on you as either the administrator or student leader to think about how that impacts your fellow students. So the first is voter ID information. So different states have very different voter ID laws. Find out what those laws are for your state and make sure you're very educated on that. That's going to be one of the most common questions you're going to get as you're working out near the polling location. Additionally, know which polling locations your students should be going to. So students in Travis County are actually able to vote at any polling location because of a really specific law that our county clerk used to make that possible. Even in Texas, that is not the case. So know specifically what your county laws are for polling locations and where your students should be going. Also know what times those polling locations are open. That should also be available on your county website. I think generally getting to know those officials who are in charge of elections and registration in your counties can be incredibly useful because I guess I'll give an example. So Texas is in early voting right now, and we had an incident earlier this week where a student was turned away from a polling location because her address on her ID did not match her address where she was registered. In Texas, as a student, your ID does not have to match the registration address. And so that was wrong. And I was able to very quickly email our county clerk who is in charge of elections and say, hey, I just thought I would let you know that this happened. And so we were able to have a conversation about that, and the student was taken care of. So that's why I think that's so important. Additionally, if you can't get anywhere with your county elections, that's when you're going to bring in someone like the Election Protection Hotline or calling your state, depending on who you think can be most useful. If someone is turned away unfairly, now if someone just like didn't bring in any ID in Texas, they would be turned away. And that is fair according to the law. So do know the difference between the law and like someone not following the law properly. I'm going to unmute you, Lauren. Is there anything, Lauren, that you think we should add about laws or working with local officials, anything like that?
No, I mean, we know about what's happening in Oklahoma specific to voter ID laws. It's pretty interesting here with what kind of identification you need to have when you go to the polls. So just specifically in Oklahoma, for anybody that is doing that here, our state schools, we can use our state, so OU, OSU, any of the state schools, students can use their student ID since it's considered a Oklahoma state issued ID since we're a state institution. So our private schools can't, but our public institutions can, which is huge for our students. But I think it's important to talk about being turned away because not all poll workers always know what all those nuanced laws are. And so we're advocating on our campus for students to know about provisional ballots and making sure that they're really, if they're turned away because they're either not on the roll or they're not, they're being turned away because they don't have the proper identification, that they know that they have the ability by law to request a provisional ballot and turn that in. So that's something that we're really going to advocate with students.
Awesome. Thank you. That's helpful to add.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to move on from laws. If you guys have any questions, just to remind the many, many Texans who will hopefully be watching this video, in Texas, student IDs are not a form of identification that you can vote with. So that was Lauren from University of Oklahoma, where that is allowed. So don't get confused, please. So we'll talk a little bit more about celebrating Election Day. I think one of the biggest things is preparation. So many of us have already in Texas been celebrating. So we pushed early voting. There are a lot of campuses where you only have an early voting location for like 1 or 2 days. So you celebrated that, and that is awesome. And we are so excited to see that you are doing that. The first step is knowing the laws of your county, of your state, and nationally, what is and isn't allowed, and also preparing your students to vote by knowing what's on their ballot. So 2 of my favorite tools for that are vote411.com, which is with the League of Women Voters Nonpartisan Voting Guides. That one typically has more of your very local elections on it, from what I can see, depending on if there's a League of Women Voters in the area. So if you're in a fairly highly populated area, they probably have information for that. Ballot Ready has information about what those roles will do, but as you get down ballot, they don't always have as much information about those local races. So do keep those 2 tools in mind. They're very good tools, and they're also nonpartisan. So as something for a school to promote, you should not receive any backlash from using those 2 tools. There are many, 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 many different resources for finding about who's on your ballot. But I think the really important thing is making sure your students understand that like their ballots are not just 3 items. For example, in Travis County, most of our ballots are between 60 and 65 items that students are voting on. And so we need to make sure our students are prepared for that, because it's kind of shocking if you walk into the polling location and see that many items. Now, not all of those, like that's quite a few people who are running unopposed, but just keep that in mind. One thing that we're doing here at UT is kind of like a fantasy football, but for politics. And so we're doing a competition for students to guess who they think will win each election. So not who they want, but who they think will win each election. And then the person who guesses the most correct is going to receive a prize. And so we're using that to make people really look through their ballots and understand like what different positions do, because when you get to the railroad commissioner in Texas, you're like, oh, this person has nothing to do with railroads. And a lot of people just don't know all of those down ballot positions. Additionally, with education, do know that you really, really, really want to try to be nonpartisan, just especially from an administrative perspective, to keep your life a little bit easier. And also, I think it's best for the students. Anyways, they can receive this information in other places as well, but these are like, we're kind of considered, student leaders and administrators, like trusted sources ourselves. And so don't try to like hoodwink anyone into thinking that something is nonpartisan if it's not. Also in prep, you want to start thinking about social media and using social media currently to promote that. Doing something like creating a campus-wide election day event on Facebook is a really good way of reminding people that the election is happening, and also where they can vote, depending on if you have a polling location on campus or not. That is, I think, one of the easiest things that we can do that's not super consuming, and also something that student leaders and your student assistants as administrators would have no problem jumping on to do. Have your students take the allintovote.org pledge. Currently, out of the schools that could be watching this, 4 are in the top 25. So Iowa State, Texas Tech, Baylor, and UT Austin are all in the top 25 for the All Into Vote pledge. By top 25, I mean number of pledges that each school has had made by students. And that is a nonpartisan organization. It's part of the All Into Vote Challenge group. And they're just sending reminders out to students. So taking that pledge helps them get voting information. Also, not necessarily, I say use coordinate, but I don't think I meant to use coordinate. Know what is happening on campus, and then also how you can help promote all of those different things on campus. If you're on a big campus, you can't necessarily have your hands in every single event that is happening, and you shouldn't necessarily have your hands in every single event that's happening. But I do think by using your social networks to promote those other events happening on campus, you're just going to see even bigger turnout. On the day of, if you had time to plan one, host a party at the polls. Vote Together has been doing really, really great work in supporting schools with Party at the Polls. So I know that TAMU has hosted one. We held one yesterday as early voting. I'm not sure who else is hosting official Vote Together events. But in general, having a big event somewhere near a poll or at a pickup and drop off location for transportation to get students to and from the polls is a really, really fun way to make voting not kind of this boring, I'm standing in a line, why is this so important kind of event. If you can provide transportation to polling locations, if you don't have a polling location on campus, this can be the true game changer for those campuses without polling locations. Also, I know a lot of cities do free public transportation on those days, on election day. So if that is the case for your town, make sure your students are aware of that. If you haven't had time to plan something really big, these are some of the really, really simple, easy things that you can do on election day to kind of create a sense of celebration. So research says that if we thank voters for turning out, they're going to turn out to vote again. So you want to think about voting in that way. You don't just want them to turn out for their first election. You want them to turn out for a 5th and a 6th and a 7th election down the road, because we're creating this nation of citizens who actually vote, and that's our goal. One of the most basic ways that I think all admins and student leaders know how to do is get pizza. So hand out pizza to people who are waiting in line. There's this really awesome group that actually had people donate money to give pizza, and then you could request pizza. So if you don't have the funding for pizza, you can actually go to this website, request pizza, and they will try to send it there. We had some of that dropped off last night, and it was pretty cool. Oops, not what I meant to click. So that's a really cool tool that I thought everyone should know about. We have done thank you cookies and cards in the past. So if you do have a larger student organization or student government that you're working with, who like to do hands-on activities like decorating cookies is a fun way to get your more engaged students doing things for students who are learning how to be engaged now. Flowers that are to remind people about voting, or just doing things to draw attention to polling locations, so costumes, music if it's allowed, those kinds of things. But it is so very important to note that you cannot give someone something for voting. That is illegal. So you can do things to remind people about voting, but remember, if someone has already voted, or if they cannot vote, or if they do not plan to vote, you should still be giving those items to everyone. You cannot just give someone an item for voting. Any kind of reward is illegal, and we don't want anyone to get in trouble. So when we're handing out cookies, everyone can pick up a cookie. We just want people to be excited about voting and excited about the election, and that's what we talk about. But then we're like, hey, if someone is picking up a cookie who has voted, we'll often be like, thank you so much. That was really great that you voted. So they get that reminder, but we're not actually exchanging any goods for a vote. I just have to like reiterate that like a ton of times, because that is one of the things that UC schools accidentally do, especially student-run organizations who maybe aren't aware of that law, do accidentally. Like, they just want to see people turn out to vote. It's not like they're doing this maliciously, and then get in really big trouble legally, and we don't want to see any of that happening. I'm going to ask Lauren if there's anything she wants to add about like activities on campus that you've done that you saw as successful.
I mean, yeah, you kind of hit everything. We don't have a polling location on campus, so we don't have a big party, but we do station ourselves in kind of one of the locations where we can get a lot of students, and we do donuts, and we're doing bananas too, just in case people want to be healthy, or we're passing out coffee and just information, kind of a stop to say like, hey, today is election day, and we have polling location information. So we've got lists of all of the precincts that are around campus of where students may be living. And then I've got little flyers with a little map on there with the address. So if people are, stopping by to ask, where's my polling location, we can look that up for them or help them look that up, and then give them a little reminder, something kind of to take away, like, hey, this is where your polling location is, but also a reminder to actually vote that day. And so that's kind of what we're doing. And then we're doing a party, an election night watch party, later on in the day. So
awesome. And that is my next one. We'll get to that one in the next slide. They're like kind of different animals, watch parties versus election day. Thank you.
Yeah.
So speaking of watch parties, just some things to think about with watch parties. Some of this is basic. If you've ever planned an event with students, it's always the same. Have food and soda or water or whatever. Make sure that everyone has a full belly. With this, something just like general organizing with students I've found is be aware of people with food allergies or restricted diets, because if you take care of them at one event that they go to of yours, they will continue coming back. If you're a student organization, they may like literally choose to like join your student organization because they were a little interested in the thing you did, and then they like thought you were thoughtful because you had a pizza without cheese on it, something like that. Find balanced news sources. So it's probably best if you're not running MSNBC or Fox News as your chosen screening. In the 2016 election watch party that we hosted on campus, honestly, we found that most students were pretty happy with like either the New York Times or Washington Post or CNN screenings. Those were the three that tended to keep people happy. We were trying to flip news sources, just so people could like kind of watch different things that were coming on, and via like feedback we were getting from our attendees, which we had a really, really big watch party in 2016. We found that those are just kind of the three that were keeping people most happy. And we only really flipped when it just kind of became stagnant on one news source. I think that probably the most important thing to think about with a watch party is that you are the people who are providing a space for students who don't want to attend like the Republican or the Democrat or the candidate parties, right? So there are other parties going on. Don't try to get those people who are already going to go to those parties to go to your party. You are the party where the people who don't feel comfortable in those spaces want to be. So while this is a highly political event, and don't try to make it not political, do note, like, you're kind of creating a really kind of special space for people who may identify with a party but have chosen to go to a nonpartisan event for a reason. So keep that in mind throughout the night. Make sure you're announcing big wins on both sides if you have like someone who's like emceeing or something for your event. And just that was also probably our largest takeaway from 2016 was that we did not expect to have a room. We had a space for 150 people that was at capacity the whole night. And they said it was for that reason, that they like actually felt like they could come and like not be judged. And so I think that's really important. Provide activities to do during the event. Things that I've heard of people doing are like political bingo, like doing political like coloring pages. We're going to have a follow along map so you can like mark what's happening on your full map. And additionally, because we do have a great coalition of student orgs, we are actually asking other student orgs to bring other items to do. So that's a really great way to get more people to attend your event if you want your event to be larger, and also like have more happening without you as the organizer just doing a ton of different activities at one time. I think we're going to decorate cookies, just kind of keep it fresh and fun. Our space is going to be outdoors. So we're bringing in inflatable chairs so that it's comfy and people want to stay. We know to expect as it gets later in the night for people to leave for a few reasons. One, our party is not providing any form of alcohol for our over 21 students. It's a little bit more fun for them to go watch in a bar. That's okay. They can do what they want. And also kind of as certain results come in, either people are not happy or know what they want to know and will leave. So kind of front load your event in general, because people are going to leave whether or not you have activities happening. Because in the end, what they care about are the results. What are you guys doing for your watch party, Lauren?
Ours is pretty basic. We partnered with one of our residential colleges on campus, and so it's going to be in their dining room. So we've kind of reached out to, we're actually the only watch party that's happening on campus. So college Republicans and college Democrats aren't, and so we've invited both of their student organizations to the party, all of the other different organizations that were helping us with our voter registration stuff. And so we're going to have multiple TVs with different stations, probably New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, like you said. And then we'll have, people that helped us, like I said, with the voter registration drive that we did on campus there. And so really it's just a space where people can kind of mingle. I think it was really important that you talked about how this is a space for people who aren't necessarily interested in going to candidate parties or partisan parties. I really want to highlight that because that's what we've noticed too on our campus, that it's an important space for people who are engaged and are interested, but don't necessarily want to get into super partisan topics that night. They just want to they want to have fun. They want to kind of be with other people as the polls come in. So yeah, ours is super kind of low key, but I'm interested to see how this goes since nobody else is doing any other kind of watch parties on campus this year.
Random thing to keep in mind that I never expected being an issue, like because our party filled to capacity, we literally had to put bouncers at our doors because we could only fit 150 students in our space, which becomes kind of a hairy issue.
Sure.
because like you're not letting people access, but you're like physically, literally, I'm not allowed. UT required us to have security on in our space as well. So we had a UTPD officer. We ended up with really great officers, so it wasn't a bad dynamic, but sometimes that dynamic is hard for students to like know that that can be kind of a difficult thing to navigate. Like those were two of our unexpected challenges from our first watch party that we'd ever done. But it was still really exciting to see. Oh, and it rained awful, so our pizza was soggy. Like those were like the three worst like organizing parts of the night. Yeah. Let me see. So after the election, we need to think about our election debriefings. And so what are we doing next, or what's happening directly after the election, and then what do you want to be doing next? So as we clearly saw on campuses across the country in 2016, elections can be polarizing and very stressful for students. So think of ways to create spaces for open dialogues. Now is the time, if you've ever wanted to do a deliberative dialogue activity, that is the time to start doing it. Also, depending on how much work students were putting into it, I personally went out and made little like de-stressing gift bags for some of our students because they had worked so many hours on the election, and no matter what the results were, like that was something that I thought deserved to be pointed out and noticed because they had worked so hard. If your school is hosting an actual election debriefing, make sure you share it with your students. If not, consider hosting a debriefing yourself. So that's usually bringing together people from a bunch of different communities and just talking about generally the election results, what you think those results are going to lead to, the general attitude and polarization that may or may not happen during an election. It's just a chance to get a bunch of different voices in the room, but it's a little different from a deliberative dialogue because the rules are different. If you're an organization, discuss what worked and what didn't work during your election. Use this time to learn from what you did. Make sure you're documenting what you think did and didn't work, and make sure everything that you did do is documented so that you can look back and say, oh, these are the things we did. This is an activity that we could have done digitally because like 2 people showed up, and we don't want to waste our resources on that, but we thought that like the goal of something was really great. You want to be thinking about how to improve for the next election and then what your steps forward are going to be. For Texans, we're pretty immediately going to be jumping right into ledge session after this. So I think for the Texans on this phone call, that is how you keep students interested in politics. Everyone's like, how do we keep students civically engaged? How do we make sure they're continuing to participate in the entire electoral process? And so I think that the things I foresee happening, at least on our campus, with ledge session coming up, is that some of our other student organizations are already really excited about promoting ways for students to be able to vote more easily. So I think that I would not be shocked if someone doesn't try to push a student ID as an actual voting ID. Like that might be a project that moves forward. Think about ways that internally your school can be better for elections so that you're not trying to push school legislation through at the 0 hour. So legislation that may be, I know that I've seen some schools trying to make election day a holiday. That's not the kind of legislation you can start and expect to see done in a month if you actually want to see your school calendar change that's done years in advance. So those are the kinds of projects that your schools can be taking on looking forward. I also want to point out that looking forward, the students you need to there are kind of 2 groups of students that you're working with, right? Your underclassmen and your upperclassmen. So this is also a time to start helping your upperclassmen think about if they do want to do political work after college, what does that look like, and also starting to help your underclassmen learn how to take on leadership roles that your upperclassmen are leading. So sometimes civic engagement is teaching people how to be leaders, not necessarily just straight up political. Lauren, is there anything that you want to add to that bit either?
No, because that's somewhere that we need to grow. So, yeah, just thinking about how to debrief, how to focus efforts for the next year, the next cycle, and so that's something that we're working on in Oklahoma.
So everyone who's watching this, I want you to think about what your plans are going to be. I'll be sharing these in both of our Facebook groups. So if you want to answer that question of what are your plans for Election Day, so we can celebrate those for you on social, but also what your plans afterward are so we can all learn from you, that would be great. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop those in the comments or email me. Special thanks for Lauren for being a really good sport, for me putting you on the spot so much.
Sure, no problem.
And everyone have a wonderful election day. Happy voting.